I will now officially start this event by welcoming you to another Agora online event. Today, the topic is On the Road to Greening Economies in Southeast Europe, Options for Economic Recovery and Renewables Deployment. My name is Nicola Bock. I'm head of events at Agora Energiewende, and I'm going to be your host today, guiding you through this online event. We are going to present and discuss the results of a project that we've been working on over the past years, and not just Agora Energiewende, but also our partners from the regions, but they will be more detailed introduced later on. Now, what's going to happen during the next 2.5 hours? We do have 2 sessions, and each will be started with a presentation and then followed by a commentary and a Q&A session, where we would also like to integrate you, dear audience. So you will have the option to raise your questions. I will come to that in a bit. And in between the 2 sessions, we have foreseen a short break for you to refill your coffee or tea or water, and to also do a little bit of stretching to sort of show your body that Session 1 is over and Session 2 is now starting. And if everything goes well, we should be ready by 1:15 so that everyone has time for lunch or for dinner, speaking of the audience from Japan. So now, I'm sure you've all had experiences with Zoom events, either with us or with other companies, because we've been using this a lot. I would still like to introduce you how we are going to work with it today by informing you about the opportunities you have to get in contact with us. If you check the bottom of your screen, and again, let me tell you, I have a control monitor here to see what you see. And you see 2 boxes. One is called chat and one is called Q&A or F&A. And the chat box is meant for your organizational and technical questions. You can put them in there. They will remain invisible for the rest of the audience. Only the panel will see it. And I have a colleague, Robin Emline, who's the assistant of our EU team. And maybe, Robin, you can quickly switch on your camera so that the audience can see you. Hi, Robin. Thanks for looking after the chat. Robin will be looking after the chat to make sure that all your technical and organizational issues are addressed. And she will also inform you about relevant links regarding the presentations or studies or email, website addresses, etc. Right? Thank you, Robin. And we'll see whatever you put into the chat there. Then the other box is foreseen for your content-related questions. Again, they will remain invisible until the moment we pick them for the discussion, because we will have Christian Redl and Sonja Risteska, who will be introduced in a bit, looking after them and trying to cluster, because usually we receive quite a lot of questions and we may not be able to answer all of them, but obviously we try to address most of them. So they will be going through them, and once we pick them for the discussion, they become visible. Some may be answered in writing if they are easy to answer in writing, like with 1 sentence or so. And the minute they are answered in writing, they will also become visible. So make sure to maybe read them again before you hit the button, in order not to have any careless mistakes. And also, if you would like to address a question to a specific panelist on the podium, let us know the name of the panelist, so it's easier for us to see which person the question is for. Right, we are recording this event in order to make it available on our website afterwards. And as I said, I have a control monitor here to see what you see. And if you're interested in finding out how many are watching, you can, if you're not in the full screen mode, you can see that on the top left of your Zoom window. And with this, I am going to now stop my sharing. And I will introduce the moderator of the first session, Christian Redl, Senior Advisor at Agora Energiewende. And Christian, welcome and good morning. And I'm handing over the microphone to you to introduce the first session.
Many thanks, Nicola. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning and warm welcome from my side as well. It's a pleasure that many of you have joined actually our event today to discuss what we think is really a very important topic, namely boosting the energy transition in Southeast Europe. In our event today, we will discuss it from two specific angles. One is a green recovery and financing point of view. We will do this in this session now. And then in the second session, from a PV investment point of view. Now, let me introduce our panel of the green recovery session. We will have two presentations, one from Dr. Radostina Primova. Radostina is a senior analyst in the economic program of our Bulgarian project partner CSD, the Center for the Study of Democracy. And one from Michaela Holl. Michaela is a senior associate at Agora Energiewende, working on EU energy policy with a specific focus on the European Green Deal. Now, for the questions and answers session of this panel, we will be joined by Martin Vladimirov, who heads the Energy and Climate Program at CSD. Then Hrvoje Dorotić, who is a project assistant at the Power Engineering and Energy Management Chair at the University of Zagreb, our Croatian project partner. Professor Dimitri Lalas, who is senior advisor at FESETS and former president of the National Observatory of Athens, which is our Greek project partner, and Dr. Radu Dudau, who is the director of the Energy Policy Group, our Romanian project partner. And in addition, also Sonja Risteska, project manager Southeast Europe at Agora Energiewende. She will support me and make sure that we do not overlook any of your important questions. So this is the panel. Looking forward to the presentations and the discussion. But before we start content-wise, I quickly hand back to Nicola for another poll.
Yes, thank you, Christian. I'm going to share my screen once more, and you should all now be able to see the question that we have for you. What is your professional background? Again, my colleague Robin will put the link into the chat, or you type in www.menti.com using the code that you see on the top of your screen, which is 85277964. And you have the option to choose between energy utility sector, renewables developer / sector, energy efficiencies sector, financing sector, government sector, academia, consultancy, NGOs or not-for-profit sector. And then if you don't find yourself anywhere there, just click other. And let's leave it on for a bit. Let me see how many we have who already let us know. 23, so maybe a few more. We see we have 8 persons from the NGO or not-for-profit sector, followed by consultancy and academia. And maybe the ones from the other sectors can tell us no via the chat. So maybe next time we can integrate it. I mean, of course, it's always a question on how many options can you offer. At some stage, it becomes a bit too much, but maybe we missed something out. Another person from the renewables developer or renewable sector. And then one from the energy utility sector, energy efficiency sector, and government sector. No one apparently from the financing sector. And the NGO group is still sort of leading. You can still let us know your professional background, but I think I give now back to Christian so that we can start with the presentations.
Thank you, Nicola. Yeah, I said so in the first panel. We want to present and discuss perspectives for linking economic recovery and its financing In the region, with reaching ambitious European Union climate targets for 2030 and 2050, as you know, the European Union committed itself to lower its greenhouse gas emissions by at least a net 55% by 2030 and reach net zero emissions by 2050. So we have an exciting road ahead to modernize and decarbonize our energy systems. Now, without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Radostina for her presentation on the analysis of the recovery plans from Bulgaria, Croatia, Greece, and Romania. Radostina, please.
Many thanks, Christian. I'm going to share my screen now. Before I start, I would like to welcome everyone who has joined us. It's great to know we have such a wide geographic participation and representation from across Europe and also from Japan, as we have seen. Just a moment. So you should be able to see my screen now. So today we want to have a more in-depth look into the green recovery process in Bulgaria, Croatia, Greece, and Romania. Before I start my presentation, I would like to acknowledge the contribution and thank in particularly to our partners and starting with the with our Greek partner, the National Observatory of Athens, the Energy Policy Group in Romania, and finally the University of Zagreb with the Faculty of Engineering and Naval Architecture that contributed also a lot to this comparative overview with their in-depth assessment, and finally Agora and Energivende for steering these collaborative efforts. As you have already know, last year the European Union adopted one of the largest green stimulus budget or package in the history of the European Union with the multi-annual financial framework and Next Generation EU. So with this 1.8 trillion in total, the European Union is trying to support reforms and investments in member states towards green and digital transition. The Recovery and Resilience Facility is one of the centerpieces of the Next Generation EU with 672.5 billion euro. And it will be, however, the implementation will depend very much on the Recovery and Resilience Plan developed at national level. And a very important here objectives, first of all, with the whole MFF and Next Generation is the climate conditionality target of 30%. The rule of law conditionality, the rules are going to be currently defined. And this is in particular reflected in the Recovery and Resilience Plan and in the two major criteria according to which recovery funds will be assessed, the 37% green spending target and the 20% share that has to go to digital transition. Where do we stand now? Almost all countries except for 4 have submitted their versions of the plan that are currently being assessed. We have just Bulgaria, Estonia, Malta, and Netherlands are still working on their final versions of the plan. In Bulgaria, we have currently an interim government that is implementing certain changes and trying to push towards more ambitious decarbonization targets in the plan. So hopefully the outcome would be a more ambitious recovery plan to be submitted later this year. We have already, as you can see, however, the question is to what extent this recovery or the measures in the recovery plans are already reaching the 37% share. And for this, we have done a more in-depth assessment of the 4 countries. However, in order to have a general view of this is the Green Recovery Tracker, where some of us have participated with national country assessments. This has been a tool for the assessments of each recovery plan. The main indicator there is already the impact or the effect of each recovery measure on climate mitigation or reducing greenhouse gas emission. So each measure based on also country experts is assessed on a scale from a negative to very positive. And you can see here the results based on the assessment of 16 countries. A very important criteria that distinguishes the very positive from positive measures, which you already see here, is in particular the conditionality of the targets and also the strength of the certain, whether particular measures have binding conditionalities or not, and in particular whether they have more quantitative targets and concrete targets, or they provide just the general framework. What in particular stands out is that 53% of all recovery measures will likely have no climate effect, or the effect cannot be assessed. So 27%, in 27% of the measure, we can see there is some climate effect, but the direction is not accessible. It could be positive or negative, depending on the implementation, because in many of the plans, in particular, the scope is not clear enough. And this is something to be highlighted. So the Commission, what is the current process? The Commission will review the plans after 3 months after the receipts, and then the Council needs to approve them on a case-by-case basis, and afterwards the initial payment will start. So talking about the 37% target, this is how it looks based on the 16 countries in the Green Recovery Tracker and the 2 additional ones on Greece and Croatia, for which we received a country assessment from our experts. So most of the plan are below this, or the predominant part is below the 37% green target. Based on our assessment here, we have to say that our methodology is based on the taxonomy in the RRF regulation, but also we count only the very positive measure fully towards this percentage, and the positive measures with the coefficient of 40%. Only Croatia, Finland, and Germany are above the 37% threshold. And talking about the countries from Southeast Europe, most of them, 3 of them stay somewhere in the middle. And only Croatia, the measures there are, so the majority of the measures are assessed there as positive. When we already look in particular, this is at the shading of the different measures, we'll see that in particularly in Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece, we have a large bunch of measures that cannot be particularly assessed, where the implementation modalities are not already defined. And in particular, I can give a particular example from the Bulgarian Recovery Plan, where we have a decarbonization fund that was quite highly promoted. However, the rules for the operation of the fund and the particular modalities are not identified, and how this fund will operate. And finally, it will turn out that the fund will already support not just all sectoral measures, but just energy efficiency measures. And other countries, for example, Bulgaria and Romania, we have hydrogen projects, but when you look into more in-depth, these are hybrid hydrogen gas projects and are supporting the expansion of gas infrastructure in countries. So whenever you have you have a lot of mix of good and positive, basically of bad and negative elements in the plans. As you can see, there is also significant percentage of negative effect on the climate in Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece here. When we already looked at the sectoral allocation of the measures, what comes out is that we don't have a balanced allocation. And there are particular differences in the countries. In some countries, we have some overemphasis on one areas, but certain areas are completely ignored or underdeveloped. For example, as you can see in most countries, the building sector is quite important centerpiece of the green pillars or the green transformations. But what was surprising for me, that looking at the industry in Romania and also in Greece, you have almost no particular measures for industrial transformation and greening the industry sector, where in Bulgaria you have almost 20% of measures. However, this is due to the economic transformation program that has been included in the second version of the draft. However, you don't have clarity, you don't have a definition or identification of priority clusters, and there are a lot of question marks about or uncertainties how this budget will be allocated and managed. Here you can see that some countries have already a stronger focus on mobility, like Romania, Croatia in particular, and also in Greece to a certain extent. However, the difference here is that, for example, in Croatia, the mobility measures focus a lot on hydrogen utilization and not so much on electromobility. In Bulgaria and Romania, most of the measures focus on railway transport. However, in Bulgaria, we have a lack of measures on promoting electromobility. So what are in the particular common features in the recovery plan in most of the countries? The first very important one, and I cannot stress this enough, is that in many of the plans you have a combination of measures, but they are not strategically aligned towards the long-term decarbonization target, and also to a more comprehensive energy strategy. And even in most of the countries, these recovery plans are even not aligned with the higher EU climate target of emission reductions of 55%. So this is still lacking in many of the plans. There is also weak complementarity between the energy components and the climate components in the recovery programs and other funds like the Just Transition Fund, the cohesion policy funding. And this was also one of the requirements of these green transition funds, that complementarity should be established and this long-term goal should be the final perspective. The other thing is we have different coal phase-out commitments in the different countries. In particular, the most ambitious is the Greek one. They recently scaled down their phase-out timeline, and current phase-out will be 2025. Previous it was 2028. And the Romanian one is 2032. However, they will phase out only hard coal, which is quite marginal. And so it's quite a weak commitment. And in particularly in the Croatian case, it's not particularly defined. So it will be between 2035 and 2040, but there is no particular date in mind. And in the Bulgarian one, there is basically no date yet. The other thing, there are a lot of investments, and we talk about considerable investments in infrastructure with possible fossil fuel loopholes that could lead to some long-term lock-in effects in fossil fuel-based infrastructure. In particular, we're talking here about the expanding gas distribution system in a lot of the plants, and also hydrogen infrastructure. However, this will be based predominantly on natural gas or blending of green hydrogen with a large proportion of natural gas, and carbon capture and storage pilot projects. And what is lacking is also that in the building and industry projects, they lack clear sustainability targets. And in particularly, what is lacking is how we'll uptake hydrogen and synthetic fuels in the industry sector, which would be a huge challenge for Southeast European economies that need to lower their energy demand and also need to replace the fuel mix there. How we're going to deal with energy intensive industries. This is something which has been ignored in most of the plan. In some of the plan, we also have underinvestment in modernization and expansion of the grid, which is going to be the backbone of the energy transition in these countries. We also we see different approaches to green recovery. In particular, the Greek recovery plan seems to be the most ambitious one in terms of this long-term perspective and boosting the storage sector and increasing this. For example, 10.4 billion will be investing in upgrading the energy infrastructure in green innovation and technology, which is significant investment. And recently we heard also that the Greek government will launch the 700 megawatt battery storage tender only this year. And with this, it is also trying to support the expansion of the electricity network system within Greece, but also with neighboring countries, in order to fulfill its target of 35% renewable energy by 2030, or 60% renewable energy in the electricity network by 2030. In the Bulgarian, Greek, and Romanian recovery plans, we already see a strong focus on the building renovation programs. However, in many of the cases, what is lacking is specific renewable energy targets that could be, and energy efficiency that are quantifiable, and where we could judge where the impact is high, medium, or low. There is also a strong focus, as I mentioned, on hydrogen utilization in the transport sector in the Croatian recovery plan. So this is a strong pillar there. And as I mentioned earlier, risks for locking gas-based infrastructure in Croatia, Romania, and Bulgaria. Something which is new now, because we had different versions in many of the countries, that compared to the previous versions, there is a possibility for breakthrough and transformative shift in the Bulgaria plan, because the government is currently negotiating the inclusion of an offshore Black Sea project or a pilot project, and also is going to launch probably solar PV and battery storage projects. Hopefully we'll see them in the final version of the plan. So I would like to highlight some good practices. The first of all is the Renovation Wave program in the Romanian recovery plan, which is very well tailored to the specific built environment and has targeted measures for historic and cultural buildings. As I mentioned already, boosting of the storage sector, not only with investments, but also with energy storage regulatory framework to make it fit. The pilot offshore wind farm in the Black Sea in the Bulgarian case, which is still under negotiation. We have some very good measures for the modernization of the district heating system in the Croatian recovery plan. And a very interesting community-led project in Romania is the Via Transilvanica project, which is establishing paths for walking, cycling, horse riding for crossing the Transylvania region. And in Croatia, we also have ambitious targets for production of green hydrogen and establishing hydrogen charging stations. What are now some of the best practices? As already mentioned, the missing of specific targets, sustainable energy targets in the Romanian and Bulgarian recovery plans, and already the support of natural gas pipelines for future hydrogen transport in Bulgaria. Here is already to mention the budget is in the latest draft version of the that was submitted in April. We have an increasing of the budget of 270 million euro are going to be allocated to this hybrid hydrogen natural gas projects that will go to the largest lignite-fired power plants. And already another additional 120 million will go to pilot green hydrogen projects, but they will be again concentrated in the largest IPP coal producers. The other thing is the that Croatia is going to expand its gas transportation system. This will also undermine the more long-term decarbonization targets. And in Romania, the green hydrogen will be blended with natural gas and will be injected into the grid. The other thing for the Greek, despite these ambitious targets on renewable energy investments, what is lacking is an energy poverty dimension. There are concerns that many of these projects will not benefit vulnerable consumers, or there is not a targeted strategy to involve vulnerable consumers. Also, in many of the countries, what is lacking is a focus on more decentralized citizen-led projects, prosumer-led projects. We don't have enough focus on this in the plans. I'm going to provide a very quick snapshot into the Bulgaria, although I addressed many of the points, is in the 2030 climate targets, they're already not aligned with the more ambitious EU targets for emissions reduction. We still have a lot of focus on stranded assets like coal, gas, and nuclear power plants. Even the growth in the renewable energies is going to be based a lot on biomass in the heating and cooling sector, which according to us is unrealistic. And again, no specific measures for prosumers and energy communities. We need an enabling framework there and already innovative financial instruments in order. And still the decarbonization strategy for 2050 is still pending. So this is the next step. What are the key transformative investments in the existing one? There are some good practices like, for example, energy efficiency, measures support like solar heating and PV systems, and particularly for household consumers that are, or for households that are not connected to the gas and district heating transmission system. There is also support for modernization and digitalization of power transmission operator, but it's still not sufficient. And as I mentioned, a dedicated economic transformation program, including these three major funds that will give a direct access to small and medium enterprises. But even here, we need priority clusters and particularly climate conditionality targets, and make sure that this is allocated in a just way. I mentioned the pilot offshore wind. However, Bulgaria needs to diversify its supply and also look at hydrogen research, needs to explore its geothermal capacity. And finally, a very interesting suggestion, not only for Bulgaria, but for the whole Southeast European region, is a possibility we need a secondary market for raw materials. As we have seen, the demand for rare earth metals is going to increase in the future. The availability within the EU is going to import a lot of these. So one possibility to boost the industrial innovation there is to have a regional Southeast European market for secondary raw materials. With this, I would like to give the word now to my colleague, Martin Vladimirov, who has also contributed to this project, and he's going to tell you some more details about the offshore wind park projects in Bulgaria and make the concluding remarks.
Thank you so much, Radostina. Thank you for this great comprehensive overview of the 4 countries' recovery plans and the recovery strategy for decarbonization. I'll be very quick because I know we are running over time a little bit. So the interim government of Bulgaria has been much more proactive in engaging the stakeholders, especially civil society, and they have called upon the Center for the Study of Democracy to help out with some improvements to the national recovery plan, especially in the energy sector. And one of the areas where we have been trying to work in the past 1 year is to promote the development of the offshore wind capacity in Bulgaria. Bulgaria is the only country in Europe with access to a sea, which has not done anything in that area, even a regulatory framework. And as you know, the European Commission has considered offshore wind energy as the future keystone for the decarbonization of the electricity system. Hence, we believe that the National Recovery Plan is the perfect opportunity to unlock the potential of the Black Sea area. We did a technical potential study, like our colleagues from EPG in the Romania part of the Black Sea, and we estimated that in a very concrete area of the Black Sea shelf, near the city of Shabua, which is northern part of Bulgaria, there is a capacity of around 4.3 gigawatts of potential offshore wind electricity. We have proposed a pilot project of 100 megawatts in this area, which will be based on the old technology, so fixed platform, but in a combination with newer turbines, the 10 megawatts turbines that have a much higher capacity factor and hence would produce more electricity and contribute more to the decarbonization of the electricity system, especially in the region of Varna, where there are big industrial consumers which can benefit in the future from this offshore wind power generation in order to fuel hydrogen production, for example, or directly connect to the park for electricity consumption. So just very briefly, we estimate the cost of this project at around 220 million euros, and we believe it could be implemented by the end of 2025. It would contribute to the decarbonization of the electricity system by saving 87,000 tons of CO2 per year. But most importantly, and I need to emphasize on this, this is not a project that would transform the Bulgarian electricity system, but it is a project that would unlock the potential by paving the way for new private investments in the same area. Since we don't have a regulatory framework, since we don't have the necessary infrastructure still, in place, there will be very few private investors that will be willing to actually risk their capital in such a project, especially in the Black Sea, which is different from the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. The wind speeds are smaller and the wind is not so constant. But still, such a demonstration project could provide the regulatory framework, could provide the necessary understanding of the peculiarities of the Black Sea region. This whole information, this whole package of documents related to the demonstration project will be then provided to foreign investors or Bulgarian private investors who are willing to then do their own projects. In that sense, the project, we believe, can be financed directly as a grant from the recovery facility, and the implementer should be a state-owned energy company in Bulgaria. We estimate that despite the lower speeds of the Black Sea, the wind speeds, the capacity factor is quite good. So the LCOE price is relatively low at 68 euros per megawatt hour. And we believe that such a project can operate for another 25, 35 years. And finally, Rados, please, next slide. Yes, I just want to point out several conclusions and recommendations for the Bulgarian decarbonization strategy in the long term. We have been working on trying to develop scenarios for decarbonization until 2050, including not only the energy sector, but also industry, buildings, transportation, and agriculture. And what we have been seeing from the modeling work is that the least costly way to decarbonize is electrification, especially in the Bulgarian framework, in the Bulgarian economic environment. It is also the cheapest way, because if we combine a fastest possible phase out of lignite-fired power plants with electrification based on significant uptake of renewable energy, the process will be very natural. So far, this is not the strategy that the Bulgarian government has undertaken. On the contrary, it has been stuck in the belief that they can preserve lignite-fired power generation into the eternity. And this lack of a plan for phase out could actually contribute to a chaos in the energy system when the power plants shut down because of economic reasons and not because of EU policy. So there is a need for a much more ambitious long-term strategy for decarbonization. There is also a better need to integrate small-scale, decentralized renewable energy sources in the system, because currently and still the main approach is large-scale utility scale projects. And even the National Recovery Plan emphasizes, large-scale battery storage, large-scale solar parks, etc. Which, it's a good way to quickly catch up with the rest of Europe in terms of renewable energy share, but it's not the way to go in the long term. In that respect, there is a need for innovative financial instruments that would promote, private investment and private ownership by households in renewable energy projects and energy efficiency. There is a need also for more focus on industry. So industrial innovation, the inclusion of hydrogen and synthetic fuels into the energy consumption mix of the industry. And finally, and last but not least, transportation is where we have been lagging most significantly. There is no real strategy for electrification of mobility. There is no e-mobility plan, and the support programs for zero emission vehicles are really lacking. Even in the latest version of the National Recovery Plan, there is actually zero effort in that direction. So energy sector is a low-hanging fruit, of course, as we mentioned. Electrification is a low-hanging fruit, but there is a lot of work to be done also in the other sectors if we are to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Thank you.
Many thanks, Martin. Many thanks, Radostina. I think, Martin, you essentially already concluded the conference with your last statement with what is important. But I think we still have then the time to discuss the details. I found the presentation very helpful, very insightful. This comparison about the countries is really impressive. And also the very exciting developments now on the Bulgarian plan. So we have a lot to discuss. Hence, I encourage the audience to post any questions in the F&A or Q&A window, depending on the language settings of your computer. We will pick them up afterwards. There are already 3 questions, so you can post questions, of course, on this comparison, but also if you're interested, I don't know, in specific issues in one of the countries. We have the experts from all the countries, Bulgaria, Croatia, Romania, Greece on the panel. So please feel free to also ask those questions. Now, but before we indeed enter the discussion, I'd like to hand over to Michaela to give us an overview of the broader framework of the European Union for financing the green transition.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So as Christian has said, I'm one of his colleagues in Agora in the new Brussels office, but I was not involved in this project specifically. But what I will do now for the next 10 minutes is provide a bit the broader picture. So picking up on what the 2 colleagues just said on Green Deal. And then continue talking also about what is available in terms of finance for these 4 member states to finance this green transition. I will be sharing just a few slides. Okay, so basically for the entirety of the European member states, we heard from Radostina, 23 member states have submitted already their plans, but we've seen the draft plans. The picture is very similar to what Radostina has described for those countries. Basically, that we see a lot of question marks behind what we call the climate mainstreaming, the 37% that the member states have to invest in this area. That on paper, it is there in most or all of the plans, because there were informal talks between the Commission and those member states. But whether they actually deliver on it is not so clear, because, for example, it is not clear what the energy efficient renovation will result in, which is important for how you account it, for example. Let me just start what it actually means, this new Green Deal ambition that Christian mentioned as his opening statement, that we now have this higher ambition of at least minus 55% by 2030, because it means a lot more, a lot faster over the next decade. You all know the Commission will be coming out with a big legislative package that operationalizes this new ambition. But basically what it means is almost a full phase out of coal in Europe. It's a significant upscaling of renewables. We look at tripling. It's starting of phase out of gas, for example, the heating and the power sector. And we would also need to see within the next 10 years, first new applications in the industry sector, which will be harder to decarbonize. And we've just heard there are some good elements in the plans, like, for example, the Bulgarians now wanting to go into offshore, into new waters, because as he said, there's none yet. So that is really good. But I would also echo what has been said, that energy efficiency is quite well covered in all plans, as is transport. However, on renewables upscaling, the picture doesn't look so good, and that's across countries. So the Commission wanted to finance a lot of the additional capacity with this recovery plan. And member states, for example, they are free to do whatever under the recovery plan. They can finance support schemes. They can use the renewables financing mechanism. They can do innovative or mature, but especially the mature ones like wind and solar and also small scale, large scale is not so present. With regard to the tagging, that's mostly an issue for, I would say, for energy efficiency, but also for the transport sector. Just to say that the European Parliament has adopted its resolution last week, and it called on the Commission to really check on the tagging to avoid that things are not green, but should be. There have been precise rules for this fund. There's precise rules in an annex of a regulation that says exactly how you should account. I wished to have been able to now tell you whether the Commission has actually done that, because the Commission yesterday issued its first assessment of the Spanish plan. So now they are coming out. The Commission had a look at the plan, and yesterday the first two for Spain and Portugal came out. They were both accepted. And now basically the Council needs to finally endorse them. And then these two countries would already get their first tranche, which is 13% of their grants part. So relatively soon by the summer. And now basically I wanted to show you a bit. So first of all, to widen a bit the picture, because we all talk about the recovery and why. You see at the scale and on the slide, because there's just a lot of money available, and all of this within a very short time. But it is not all. You see also that the cohesion and regional funds offer significant amounts of money for the member states, and the entire budget of the EU has an increased climate ambition. We were last time at, the Commission originally proposed 25, it's now 30. 30% across these funds have to be devoted to climate. So there's a lot available. Hold on. But it will not be able to, we will not be able to fund all of it by public money. Not by EU, but even if you added the national stimulus program, which we have in many countries, that would still not be enough. You all know the famous number that we need over the next 10 years to spend 315 billion euros more to finance the new ambition, the new targets. So what you also need to do is create a framework where investors want to come in. And this is taken from our publication, which I will provide the link with on the last slide for you, so you can follow up. But basically, we have tried to, so blue box is the traditional MFF. Then you have the additional EU pandemic money, the Next Generation EU, which will soon be taken from the market. You have other funds which technically are outside the MFF and are fed by the ETS, but are very relevant also for those 4 countries we talk about now, mainly the Modernization Fund. You will have national contribution, and then you also have everything under InvestEU, which basically works through loans and guarantees, and all of it together is then meant to encourage also private investment. And let me just say in this context, what is very important for the recovery fund, but also for pulling in private investment, is that we had the clean energy package. And even though the Commission comes out with new laws now, all the provisions in the clean energy package are still relevant and need to be transposed. And there are actually a few of them which are crucial for bringing in private money. For example, PPAs. These are these private contracts between a renewables generator and someone, an off-taker. Very important to scaling up because that basically gives you additional renewables without actually the need of a public budget to come in. So this should also be kept in mind. And now finally, this is my last slide. I will not be able to go into detail in this short amount of time, but we have recently issued a guide on all those instruments that describe in detail how they operate. Some of them work with a member state's plan. Some of them are more bottom-up, where basically you as a project promoter can apply. These differences are all described in this guide, where I have attached a link so you can access it. But just to wrap up, I'll spend 2 minutes and just go through these funds, and maybe we can have 1 or 2 questions on those, but in detail, I guess you would have to look it up then. So we spoke already about the recovery facility, and I think the previous speaker has already described it with the 37%. We have the cohesion funds. That was after the recovery, the second longest line on my first slide. And I think I want to pick up also on the previous speaker when it comes to complementarity, because like, for example, they said small scale is and consumer-led is missing. The cohesion fund lends itself very well for this kind of investment. And it has been strengthened by this REACT EU top-up. So that's basically more cohesion money for the next 2 years. Then we have the traditional research and investment fund, also with a focus on clean transition. The InvestEU, it's the former Juncker fund, has also a huge climate mainstreaming target for energy and mobility window. Also technical assistance. Connecting Europe facility is a bit more specialized. It's basically cross-border projects in transport and energy and digital. Then we have the Modernization Fund, Transition Fund, which just grow bigger and bigger every day because they are fed by the ETS, which has now reached new record highs. For the Just Transition Funds, the member states are in an obligation to provide just transition plans. So that will be based on a plan. And actually, for both the cohesion and the Just Transition, the member states now have the work. So they just submitted the recovery plan. Now they have to do more work. They have to finalize these operational plans that for the cohesion and regional funds and the Just Transition plans. And finally, there's a small budget of 1 billion for bottom-up actions that get the markets and the societies ready for the energy transition under the LIFE. So the LIFE was a pure environment program. Now it's also clean energy transition. That's also interesting for project promoters, because there you can go directly. And with this, I conclude and invite you to have a look at this guide for further details. Thank you.
Many thanks, Michaela. Very interesting and concise overview. I think it shows that it's not an easy thing to get a good understanding of. But I think with the clustering you provided, that's already very helpful. And I'm pretty sure that the publication you mentioned is also very helpful because, yeah, many stakeholders will need to get a better grasp of this whole linking possibilities between green transition and financing, because then one can already really start discussing the substance. Now, talking about substance, many questions have come in. Half of them have already been answered in writing by the panelists. So many thanks for your speediness on that. I would want to start with one question which was answered in writing, but maybe we can, make a link to some clarification questions on the methodology. Radostina presented to the question was from Elena Georgopoulou. Elena, great that you're here. Elena is also part of NOAA, our Greek project partner. And her question was on the large category as measures that are qualified as likely climate effect, but direction not accessible, to which sectors and subsectors this large percentage typically falls. And Radostina already answered that it depends essentially on the country. But maybe you could quickly elaborate on that, Radostina. And I would have actually an additional question, which is similar. In your slide 7, when you showed these charts, these pie charts on the sectoral allocations, was this related to the entire volume of the RRPs or only of these positive and very positive measures? And final question from my side, if you allow, the 37% benchmark and your comparison that relates also both to positive and very positive measures, I suppose.
Many thanks, Christian, and many thanks to the audience for these interesting questions. Well, I'll start first from the last questions because from the last two questions because the answer is straightforward. So regarding regarding slide 7, the sectoral overview or the sectoral measures cover the whole spectrum of recovery from negative to positive. So all recovery measures are included there in the sectoral overview, not only the positive one. Regarding the 37% green shares spending target, it is based on a methodology of the Green Recovery Tracker, in which it is a bit different than the one in the Commission. For example, the measures that are very positive, they are fully counted towards the final share or the green spending. However, the measures that are positive, they are counted with a coefficient of 40%. So basically, their weight is much lower towards the final green spending. With regard to the question, it's a very good question. The measures regarding likely climate effect, but the direction is not accessible. This could be, it's not so much, I don't see it so much as a sectoral issue. It's a matter of to what extent the targets there are specific, the scope and focus are specific, because in some cases it will go positive, in some negative, and particularly depends on the implementation. Maybe the other partners can elaborate on their particular national recovery plans, but for the Bulgarian ones, the bulk of these measures concern certain components of the smart industry program, this economic transformation program, where we don't have sufficient details, what exactly industry clusters they will encompass, what kind of according to what kind of sustainability criteria the public tenders will be allocated. We don't have such information, so it could go to basically to something which is more like reinforcing the high sustainability targets, but we don't have the conditionalities there, we don't have the scope. The other measures concern digitalization in particular, because in some cases, digitalization could also reinforce the climate target, but in some not, so we don't have details there, and education measures. In our assessment on green recovery in particular, we have provided recommendations how education measures, for example, serve this goal of just transition, like they could be used for reskilling co-workers or for creating this skilling upgrade for the new green jobs. However, we don't have such a focus there. So potentially, this pillar could be used for upskilling and preparing the market from these new green jobs, but we don't see it included there. So it could be, but it could be not. It depends on the implementation. And in some countries, it's also related to the building or transport sector in some countries. So it's not particularly clear whether the measures support shallow renovation, whether it will have any impact because it's not quantifiable, but maybe the other partners can also say something about their particular plans.
Many thanks, Radostina. That's indeed what I had in mind, that we maybe then do a quick tour through the countries. Before we do that, Toma Pavlov posted actually, and I'm now clicking a button, and I hope everyone can see this now, of a link to the European Commission on the assessment on their assessment of the recovery plans from Greece, Spain, and Portugal. And then indeed, I think it's interesting to make the comparison to the methodology Radostina just described. There is one question from Luka Dimitrov, which I think also opens up that we do a quick round through through all countries. And Radostina, you had it in your presentation. The question is, what is the hydrogen potential across Bulgaria, Romania, and Croatia and Greece? I mean, I think probably we cannot answer this on a gigawatt hours level, but just maybe it's interesting to again understand a bit better what is the role of hydrogen the government see in the context of the recovery plans and the according also hydrogen strategies, which all the countries are also drafting. Romania is preparing one, Luca Dimitru says, but what about Bulgaria and Greece and also Croatia, because Croatia apparently sees a big role for hydrogen in transport, which, yeah, to be honest, surprised me a bit. Because I think there are also cheaper decarbonization options, specifically electromobility for the transport sector. So maybe we just do a quick tour, maybe starting alphabetically again with Bulgaria on hydrogen.
So unfortunately, no such technical study has been carried out to estimate the exact potential, and that's why we included it as part of the recommendations, both for hydrogen and geothermal, that we have a regional mapping for geothermal and for hydrogen, that the potential is estimated. Unfortunately, in the last version, when we talk about hydrogen, it is seen basically the hydrogen infrastructure will transport in particularly gas as a way for gas expansion. And there is no strategic vision, for example, that talks about, for example, the use of the solar potential of the Maritsa East coal region in order to transform this kind and also develop technologies for transforming solar energy into hydrogen, or as already Martin elaborated on the offshore wind project. Also, another possibility would be to produce hydrogen also out of offshore wind. Or, however, all these visions are not included in neither in the recovery plan nor in the national energy and climate action plans. So this is a direction towards which the future government has to work on, how to diversify, in particular, these sustainable energy alternatives and use the vast solar and wind potential.
Thank you, Radostina.
If I may,
yeah, please, sorry.
Just
Martin, of course.
One caveat here. Hydrogen is the hottest word in Bulgaria right now, but it's done not as a common strategy or roadmap. There is something as a privately written document called 2030 Hydrogen Roadmap, but it's really a private initiative, mainly driven by, sorry to use these words, but oligarchic networks that have been benefiting from coal-fired generation that are now trying to receive EU funding for hydrogen as their coal plants are closing or not financially viable. They want to receive easy EU funding and build testing facilities for hydrogen research and also some hydrogen reservoirs at the sites of their coal-fired power plants. And they're requesting a lot of money for little work. So we need to be also aware that in Central and Eastern Europe, there is the potential for capturing vital public resources in the hands of the same networks that have been operating the fossil fuel-based industry. So, you know, hydrogen is good, it's the way forward, but we need to do it the right way.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, again for this clear statement. Indeed, I mean, for a net zero European Union, we will need hydrogen. But we will only need it for a very limited set of applications in very few sectors, because it's just one of the most expensive then decarbonization options. And indeed, cheap electricity from PV, we'll discuss it in the second panel, and also on and offshore wind, that will be the main, let's say, power horses for driving the decarbonization. Moving to Croatia, Jorge, maybe you can share some thoughts on the Croatian hydrogen strategy and the outlook there.
Yeah. So hi, everybody. My name is Jorge. Regarding Croatian hydrogen point of view, so in the last few years, hydrogen is becoming, let's say, a buzzword. And there is national hydrogen strategy currently, which is being drafted. It should be finalized hopefully by the end of this year. And also hydrogen is really commonly mentioned in the recovery plan, especially the electrolyzers. So I think there are like 300 megawatts of electrolyzers which are being installed by end of 2026. So it is up and running, and there are already plans to do it. Currently, there was a tender to calculate the economical point of view for 100 megawatt electrolyzer in Jertovec. I believe that Croatian participants already heard of that. Their plan is to inject it into the natural gas grid. But as you mentioned, hydrogen is mostly used in the recovery plan for transportation. Is that the optimal way? Well, not so sure. I also believe that electromobility could take a quite big share of the transportation part, and it's still left to see what will they do with the rest of it. I hope that they are talking about green electrolyzers. There's no point of producing electricity from the natural gas to make hydrogen. Yeah, that's it from Croatia.
Thank you. Very interesting also to put this in perspective. If we move to Greece, sorry, Dimitri.
Thank you, Christian. First of all, let me mention that today, actually, right at this moment that we're talking and having this very interesting discussion, Ursula von der Leyen is in Athens to announce that the Greek national plan has been approved and possibly will be actually provided to all of us to look at in more detail, because one of the problems, and I think it's not just Greece, has been the lack of transparency in the sense that you have enough details to be able to assess whether indeed projects are green and should be accounted for the 37% target or not. Also, whether what is the efficiency of some projects that are look green, but as already has been mentioned a number of times, when they're finally put in place, whether we have any idea of what the effectiveness eventually will be. So there are all these problems, but hopefully I tried since yesterday to be able to find out whether the Commission has released the details of the Greek plan. I haven't been successful, but hopefully in a few days we might be able to gauge a little bit more what actually has been approved. As Radostina said, we need a little bit more information to be able to come up with judgments that are a little bit more robust in characterizing parts of the funds as green, a little bit green, or gray. And in that respect, let me add that Radostina and I had a long discussion last night on the criteria of how do you put things in various boxes. And indeed, there are a lot of things included in the plans that whether they're eventually in the gray area or in the light green area would depend both on how they're realized, but also on the details that are not available right now. So that I think that as to the RRP aspects of it, I need to mention that Greece has been indeed on the forefront of delignitization, but I think that we should all genuflect to the ETS system, because I think the main driving force is indeed the 50 euros per allowance, because that focuses people to make sure that all these grant announcements are realized, and to be a little bit more careful about taking at face values all the green credentials. Now, having also added that, let me mention a couple of points. As vis-a-vis hydrogen, the main thrust in Greece has actually been not from the central government, but from the local government in the areas of the lignite mines, where they have taken a leading role in trying to generate interest in investments for hydrogen in Western Macedonia. And indeed, things are starting to look as if those efforts would be indeed included in the Greek plan, the final Greek plan for the just transition of these regions, and possibly be funded. In that respect, also in those lignite areas that are going to be rehabilitated, there have been not just plans, but actual for large PV plants totaling over 600 megawatts. So that is indeed something that would go hand in hand in trying to get to generate hydrogen if it is finally realized locally, both to avoid losses, but also to boost the local economy, which indeed would need a strong boost to balance the loss of income at the local level that we have from the closing down of the power plants. So let me stop here. If there are any more questions, I'll be more glad to answer them.
Yeah, many thanks, Dimitri. Then maybe Radu, if you would want to add some thoughts for Romania and specifically this hydrogen question, but I would also find it maybe interesting if you could allude a little bit on this recent announcement of Romania with a 2032 coal phase out. I think there's still quite some unclarity around that, and I'm sure all the audience is interested in that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Great event, by the way. Congrats to you all for putting it up. Hydrogen, as Hrvoje said, a buzzword, indeed a buzzword in Romania on every official's lips these days. So the need for a hydrogen strategy is being highlighted day by day. The government says it's in the making. I don't know anything concretely about the process having started about that, but the intention is there. When you ask about potential for hydrogen, it's a vague question at this point, because, well, the potential to produce hydrogen, to produce green hydrogen, to consume green hydrogen, we're still very early in the process. What I can tell is that I see conceptual confusion at this point. As Radostina mentioned, apparently the government proposed this notion of producing green hydrogen with electrolyzers. So you have to invest all this money to produce very expensive green hydrogen. And then the best idea they have for the use is to simply blend it with natural gas and burn it. So I think for the energy sector, as for other sectors in the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, if you look at the proposed investments, I'm not sure how many of them will withstand the proof of rigorous cost analysis based on technology, based on LCOEs, and also really the cost of LCA analysis, life cycle analysis, because you really have to see what the real climate impact of such investment is. So right now I see more a collection of intentions, of broadly defined directions they want to put the money in, but really full-fledged, thought-through projects haven't seen so much in in the plan. And also for hydrogen, there is a clear direction for the transport sector for developing hydrogen-fueled trains for the parts that aren't electrified. So the railway sector, which is anyway underdeveloped and still underrepresented, because I must say it seems like the real psychological complex is developing highways in Romania. So everything starts with highways and has to work down in a way, negotiated down within reason, and make place for other investments as well, like investing in railways, because this is such a derelict a chapter in the Romanian transport system, and also really no mention about offshore wind, for which the country has a serious potential. So we'll have to see what really remains of it. But again, a mix of vested interests, bottom-up regional demands for funding, aggregated, after haggling. So the whole plan was not really the outcome of a centralized, clear-headed strategic planning. It was more like putting together various demands from all across the country. Political groups of influence show their muscles, because everyone has to be, in a way, has to receive a bit of it as quickly as possible. And this is not a recipe for clear-headed planning that would really favor climate and digitalization. And also I want to notice at the end that the transparency of the process itself was very much in doubt in Romania. So not even the parliamentary parties were able to see the full-fledged plan until the date it was really submitted to the Commission, and this is questionable, I think. So it should have been much more of an exercise in a consultation and transparency. This, because after all, is a one in a generation chance to get a huge chunk of money and use it for substantial and environmentally friendly and climate friendly investment, and not just get money for hungry interest groups that need to bankroll a base of clients or political base or whatever. So the governance of this will be very important, and it's paramount that the Commission really establishes rigorous guidelines for the national governments for accountability and transparency, and really rigorous criteria of economic and climate criteria for any single project. And this is to answer just the project, but it's also the part about reform, because the plan is also about reforms. But that's a separate discussion, and I'll stop at that.
Thanks, Rado. Thanks for flagging, let's say, the intricacies of comprehensive long-term energy system planning. You mentioned Brussels, so maybe I'm conscious of time. We're a bit over time, but if I still may ask Michaela for her view on, let's say, indeed the Brussels perspective, and to what extent the Commission has, let's say, has the tools to make sure that we better align the recovery with the decarbonization.
Thanks. So yeah, I should say another seminar hijacked by hydrogen. It has a niche role in the sector, but I am confident we will talk more about the new king of electricity, as the IEA has called it, PV, later. So I'm confident. And I'm also confident that these aspects will have, so I will be looking at the first assessments of the Commission. And just to recall, there are several criteria that the member states will meet, but obviously the main thrust of a recovery plan was also to create jobs and growth. And there's no better way of doing that than with decentralized energy. So this is an aspect also that will be looked at. And just to maybe also inform you that in our work here in the Brussels office, we will be taking 5 countries' recovery plans. Not one of the countries that we are discussing today, I should say. And what we will do is look in depth at what has been done and provide forward-looking recommendation, because I mean, climate financing doesn't end in 2026 when the last payment is done for the recovery plans. I showed you we have other instruments, and then we have an update of the national energy and climate plans coming up that have to reflect the new ambition. So it's a long way down. And so what we want to do is really take the recovery plans as a starting point, and then together with country partners, look at how this can still be improved. And we've heard sometimes the plans are also not clear. So we would provide also some input, constructive input, how this could be filled with life, and maybe some reforms that could make the whole affair even cheaper, because maybe then the market delivers. So yeah, shameless propaganda again after I already announced the others. So that is basically the next work we will be focusing on. And I guess it can also be, the knowledge we generate can also be applied in the other countries, which are the purpose, the topic of discussion today. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Michaela. To summarize, maybe 2 keywords. We need more RES upscaling, and we need to make or work on ensuring that there is a better link to the longer term 2050 perspective. It reminds me a little bit of the NECP process from a couple of years back, where I think also many stakeholders thought this is a one-off exercise, and then one parks these plans somewhere on a desk. It's not similar to the recovery plans. And now when we look again to the bigger picture, the Green Deal, the next steps for reaching the 2030 climate targets, this is still an exciting discussion. But I'll stop here and hand over to Nicola, because she wants us to stretch a bit. I think I want to thank all the panelists, the great presentations from Radostina, Michaela, all the viewpoints from our national experts, the questions from the audience, and over to you, Nicola. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now that you're saying that renewables upscaling is one of the key points, thanks God we have that topic on the agenda next, accelerating renewables deployment. But since we are changing to another topic, we would like to give you, let's say, a 3 to 4 minutes break to get a new drink and maybe to stand up and stretch a little bit, like move your shoulders, or, just do like this, or take off your glasses and give your face a little massage, because 2.5 hours sitting in front of a monitor can't be too healthy, and we don't want to ruin your health. So, you know, maybe open the window, get a new glass of water or get some fruit and stuff. And we'll resume back here at 12:15, I would say, and we'll try to sort of speed up then afterwards to finish on time. Right, it's 12:15. I hope everyone was able to stretch a bit, get some fresh air, and has a new drink next to him or her. And I am not going to waste any more time because we are a bit after time, but I guess we'll be fine and finish around 1:15. And I will hand over to the moderator of the second session on accelerating renewables deployment. It's Hrvoje Dorotic from the Faculty of Mechanical Engineering and Naval Architecture from the University of Zagreb. And the floor is yours, Hrvoje.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you for a kind introduction. This is Hrvoje speaking from Zagreb. And in the next 1 hour, let's say 50 minutes, we will talk a bit about solar potential in the Southern Eastern Europe. We are on the southern part of the Europe. We have a lot of solar, but we don't have a lot of solar PVs. And we believe that the most important accelerators for integrating solar PVs are actually commercial prosumers. And regarding this, we will present you two presentations. The first one is coming from Toby Couture. They have developed study on the commercial PV prosumers in Southern Eastern Europe. Toby Couture is coming from Tree Analytics. The second presentation will be actually commentary done on this analysis. Commentary will be done by Dr. Susanna Pato from the Regulatory Assistant Projects. And I don't want to spend more time here on introduction. I am giving the floor to Toby Couture. Please, Toby, the cloud is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and pleasure to be with you all today. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to all the partners who've been part of this and have helped make this possible. So let's dive in. We've just been, in a way, the transition from talking about what we were discussing in the first half of this webinar to talking about the scale up of solar PV is in many ways a transition from talking about what is slow and costly to what is increasingly cheap and fast. And there is nothing in the world today, in the world of energy, that is that can be scaled more quickly and that is more economic than solar. And I hope to be able to provide a snapshot of some of what's happening in Southeastern Europe in the course of this presentation and give you a bit of a window into where the market is going, as well as some of the barriers that still remain. So taking a step and looking globally, we have several countries that have well over 1 million, in some cases even over 2 million solar PV systems installed. Countries like Australia, I actually just checked, the latest statistics are even up to 2.7 million individual solar systems. So on some metrics, Australia is leading the world in terms of individual systems, the majority of which are household and small business, so SME type systems. Germany also has a very high share of rooftop capacity in the distributed sector, as does Japan. And we're even seeing some really exciting developments from countries like Vietnam, as well as China, and even starting in parts of Latin America. So this is part of a bigger shift, a bigger transition towards a more decentralized power system paradigm. And we hope that with this brief snapshot of what's happening in Europe, can shed a bit of light on, again, where the market is and where things are trending and what some of the policy tools are. What makes solar so primed for growth is that the economic and financial fundamentals are there. We have arrived in a world where solar is now increasingly the lowest cost source of new power supply, and indeed is well below wholesale market prices in many electricity markets around the world. So this is, in a way, exciting new terrain and opens up the possibility to much more rapid growth in the sector, because again, it's no longer as much driven and dependent on government policy, and it's starting to be driven much more by economic and financial fundamentals. And as we'll see in the brief discussion today, markets like Bulgaria, where there isn't really a functioning policy framework for prosumers, are starting to see growth happening in spite of the lack of a governing framework for the sector. So in a way, again, economics is starting to drive the market, even in the absence of policy. So that's exciting, and that I think is promising for the health and overall dynamism of the sector. When we look at it, many jurisdictions are still, in our view, unprepared for this rapid transformation, for substantial growth in the commercial prosumer sector. We've seen in some markets, like Vietnam just last year, installed somewhere on the order of 8 to 9 gigawatts of distributed solar PV. And that kind of rapid growth was unexpected by national authorities. It was unexpected by regional authorities and DSOs. And it, in a way, shows that we don't have an excuse to be unprepared. And jurisdictions in Southeast Europe need to get serious about where the market is going on this, because we could see very significant growth, very significant and rapid development in a fairly short period of time. A further reason why policy, despite the fact that commercial prosumers in particular don't depend as much on policy as, say, under feed-in tariffs in the past, despite that, policy still plays an important role in terms of governing the market and processes around permitting, around grid connection, processes around taxation and how to deal with all of the implications of taxing self-consumption versus taxing surpluses, as well as the compensation structures for surplus still remain important. And there's still a lot of ways in which governments can improve policy frameworks to not only further encourage and better calibrate the growth of the sector, but can also provide overall better governance for its evolution. Because there are some risks in and downsides potentially, or some benefits that go unharnessed if we have purely unregulated or more sort of Wild West kind of market development. And that could actually lead to a clampdown if it's not governed properly. And we've seen that in some markets as well. So one of the things, if we look forward to the role of this more decentralized power paradigm, there is a clear case to be made that prosumers, both residential, commercial, even industrial companies, can play a more active and a more interactive role on the grid edge. And we're seeing very exciting developments in jurisdiction, well, even within Europe and Greece, but also in Australia, in the United States, around working more at the grid edge and trying to enable more interactivity between commercial prosumers and prosumers in general and the power system. And Southeastern Europe is in many ways behind the curve on this. And I think many of the innovations that are happening are going to be part of this wave. They are coming, and in some ways we're already starting to see signs that they're happening. So this is very much where things are trending. I recognize time is short, so I don't want to take too much time getting into the policy details, but for your reference and also just for the slides, you can download these and just look at them more carefully later. I wanted to provide a snapshot of the main policy tools. You'll be familiar with net metering. We're seeing many jurisdictions evolve from net metering to a slightly more conservative form of net metering called net billing. And we're seeing some jurisdictions even moving towards net feed-in tariffs, essentially a type of feed-in tariff just for the surplus. And that's part of the evolving, part of the shift that's underway. Now, different markets are at different points of the spectrum on this, and we could get into more details, but this is just useful framing to better understand what the main policy tools are. So I took some time to try to paint the picture of what the main options are, and laying out essentially around the big question of how do you pay for surplus? So what happens if someone, most commercial prosumers can only consume roughly 50%, sometimes up to 70% of their instantaneous electricity supply? What do you do with the surplus? And the answer to that question will have important impacts on bankability. So across Southeast Europe, we want bankable projects in the distributed in the distribution system. And one of the clearest ways to do that is to clarify the regulatory mechanisms around surplus generation. How does it get settled and at what price? So this graph tries to capture the kind of universe of options that are out there, from avoided costs in some jurisdictions to Greece, for example, in its latest production scheme, self-production scheme, has appealed to the latest auction result price as a way to settle the surplus. So all surplus generation will get bought at the latest auction price for that project size category. There are some issues around that potentially, which we can get into in the questions, that what if there aren't any auctions or any recent auctions? So that's an important question. And even within Greece, they're debating moving beyond that. A further option is retail prices. We have a variation on this in Croatia, which we can get into. There's, of course, regulatory setting. So simply setting a regulatory rate for the surplus and appealing to the market directly. So wholesale market prices or some kind of wholesale market benchmark, like monthly averages. And we're seeing variations on that also happening, such as in Romania in the recent legislation that was passed late last year. So that's essentially the map, the landscape of where the main policy, the main pathways are. Now, another way to think about the market and just help you understand where your countries may fit and where the overall landscape is, we've created this three big categories for the stages of market development: the early market adoption phase, the market growth phase, and the full system integration phase. And most markets in Southeast Europe are still in the early market adoption phase. That means a lot of processes are not yet clear. Market growth is relatively slow. There's still some tax and permitting issues that are time consuming and inefficient. As we move to the market growth phase, the market is more mature, the processes and paperwork is more standardized, and there's a clear sort of growth trajectory. Markets like Greece are now entering into the more market growth phase. And then the final phase is the system integration phase, where we see much more interactivity, much more interconnectedness, and much more stable market growth, where a lot of the mechanics of how do you connect to the grid, how do you deal with surplus, where do you sell it, and how are sorted out, and the market can simply grow and be governed by, say, national targets or by its own endogenous market momentum. So let's look at, before we wrap up, because I realize time is short and I'm probably already over. So let's dive in a little bit to the data, and then we can open up to discussion. This graph shows essentially where the LCOE is across the market. So we've done a number of interviews to try to get a sense of where installed costs are, where the cost of capital is, and find that the LCOE range is somewhere between 3 and 7 cents per kilowatt hour for the kind of what is now a realistically achievable project in most markets. So not assuming the best possible solar resource potential or the cheapest possible interest rate, but just assuming sort of realistic project parameters. I've included the project parameters in an annex. So if you're interested in diving into the inputs, there are also some important questions around what is the system? Is it a tracker? Are they using bifacial panels or standard traditional panels? So, but this gives you essentially a snapshot. The exciting thing about this is, as I pointed out, this LCOE is cheaper than the daytime wholesale market prices in most of these markets. So current wholesale market prices during the daytime are between sort of 4 and 8 cents. So the surplus that would come from prosumers can actually, in most markets, most of the time, actually help bring wholesale market prices down. So there's a huge economic opportunity to try to get more of this endogenous, distributed, commercial, and prosumer projects into the system, again, to help contribute and even help bring costs down. And this is a message that many stakeholders in Bulgaria and Romania and even Croatia and Greece are still, in many cases, unconvinced of. But as we look at the economics and the financial fundamentals, this business opportunity, this sort of co-benefits argument is increasingly strong because the economics are there. So quick snapshot of installed costs, again, on ranges from up higher to lower for each of the markets, and the same for the WACC, the weighted average cost of capital. So we see markets plateauing at around 9% weighted average cost of capital, and some where public subsidies or public low interest loans are available, like Croatia, as low as the 3% range. So gives you a sense of what's possible. We have to keep in mind we are living through a period of historically low interest rates. And that in many ways is wind in the sails of the distributed PV sector, because capital is cheap, capital is abundant. There's a lot of momentum and interest in providing capital to green infrastructure, and all the more reason to, again, help create bankable market and policy conditions so that this can happen and happen at scale. So I don't want to get too much into the policy pathways because I'm already over time, but as we move forward, governments in the SEC region need to find clear ways to govern this surplus generation, lifting some of the caps and restrictions, dealing and streamlining and simplifying permitting processes, which are still a nightmare in many countries if you listen to the stories from developers. And streamlining and simplifying a lot of those things is already a hugely important contribution to making this sector grow. So with that, I will stop and pass the mic back over to Ruvohe, who will help guide us through. So thank you all for your attention, and I hope I haven't pushed my time limit too unduly. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby, and thank you for bringing your presentation to a little bit shorter than planned. The next presentation is actually the commentary on yours presentation. Once again, I'm inviting all of participants that you actually provide us with your questions, and we will be happy to provide you, hopefully, some answers. Right now, I'm giving the floor to Dr. Zuzana Pato, to provide us with a commentary on the previous presentation and to bring us into the discussion. Susanna, the cloud is yours.
Thanks very much. I try to share. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So thanks very much, first of all, for the invitation for Christian and Sonia from Agora. I'm very privileged to be able to give a commentary to this project ending now in Southeast Europe and the role of renewables, and more specifically PV in the region. I thought I'm going to be very controversial, because I thought that most of the previous presentation would be about how to boost PV, but it was a much more balanced one, so I would be less controversial than I thought. What I would like to give you as a key message is that we should step beyond the more, the better, this thinking, and think about PV deployment or renewable deployment to be beneficial for the whole society, for the whole grid, and not only to those who actually install the PV on the roof. We heard about some of the limits to PV deployment in the Southeast Europe region, done by the study by Toby. And I would just like to refer back to some of the limits without discussing it.
So some financial problems with the cost of capital. There is a problem in this region with the cyclic investment support. Often we get money from the EU, but it's dispersed in a cyclic way. I also know it from Hungary. No one does things because everyone is waiting for the lump sum payment for the investment in PV. That's not good for market growth. Also, we have regulatory issues. Sometimes regulation is not clear. And here, again, I would like to refer to Bulgaria in the study. Sometimes it only focuses on self-consumption or under-dimensioning PV system, which can be good sometimes, but of course, it's also a waste of resources, both in terms of the solar potential, but also rooftop and areas to put solar panels on. So it might not be overall a good thing. So these are some of the limits that are limits to the more, the better thinking. But in my understanding, we have to make sure that regulation, and of course, it's not only about rate, which means tariffs for consumption, tariff for injection to the grid, and also meaning energy tariffs and network tariffs as well. So it's not only about the tariffs, but mainly about the tariffs, that we have to make sure that we design in a system, and not for the next 1 or 2 years, but on a long-term perspective. Then whatever choices the consumer does, whether it's a household or a commercial entity or an industrial entity, and its goal is to reduce the bill, because that's always the goal of the consumer, that it's consistent with the choices we would all make if we want to minimize system cost. So if these two choices are consistent, so the rate design in a way that is consistent, then we are going to have beneficial PV deployment, beneficial consumerism, beneficial electrification. So not only for those one involved, but also those one who bear the overall cost. So what are the issues? First one is remuneration. And of course, there are many, many ways PV or renewables in general are supported across the countries. So you can have lump sum payment at the investment. You can have tax credits. You can have, of course, production-based subsidies. You don't have FIT anymore, but you have contract for difference. You have auctions. So there are many, many ways. But also net metering, and this is something that we already referred to, is a very important and widespread means of supporting PV. And I would like to argue that we have to think now of phasing out net metering. Net metering is a very good thing. It's very simple. It's very good to kick off PV. It has been used in many, many jurisdictions, not only in Europe, but across the globe. But eventually that needs to be phased out. And it's not because the EU legislation requires us to phase out, but there are much better and substantial reasons for that. First of all, it's not equitable. We always have to think about all the consumers and not only the prosumers. And especially in this region, we would know that prosumers are going to be the well-off people, at least in the beginning. And we should think about all those who stay as normal consumers. And it's not equitable because in net metering, those who actually have the PV, they under-contribute to the cost of the grid so that all other simple consumers have to pay more for the grid. And prosumers, of course, they also use the grid as they used before. So it's not, there is a fairness thing there. The other one is that whenever you remunerate the electricity injected to the grid at the retail level, then you equate the value or the cost of consumption with generation. And essentially the value is not the same and the cost is not the same. So just think about a peak period within the day and what the value of consumption is, what the value of reduction of consumption is, and what the value of injecting excess PV generation. So these things linking production with the retail price is a bit odd. And of course, it neglects the time value of a solar. This is again something Toby referred to already. So solar is just the same as other generation sources. So the value of injecting solar to the grid depends on when you inject it. So in fact, sometimes there is a negative value of injecting solar to the grid, but maybe 2 hours later, it has a huge value to the system to inject your excess generation. And there are very wise things you can do with the rate design to make sure that those who has the rooftop solar, they consume and inject in a way that is also good for them because of the rate design they're having, but it's also good for the system. For example, in Hawaii, until the evening ramp up, you cannot inject solar, or you can inject with 0 value, sometimes even negative value. But once you have the evening ramp up, 2 hours later, or maybe 1 hour later, you get a huge amount of money for the solar you inject in the form of a much higher tariff. So my solution would be that, even if it's I don't know, maybe premature to say in some of the countries, but you have to have your eyes on the long-term thing. And I think it's much more easy to regulate also from the system perspective and the grid perspective if you disaggregate the flows. And this is the buy or sell or regime. And I'm just showing you this very simple graph. And I don't want to go into the details, but just the idea is that you decouple yourself as a producer, as a consumer. And why is it important? It's important because scarcity, both at the network level and also in the generation level, it has a completely different impact of on scarcity, your consumption, and your production. So think about distribution network scarcity. So you have a period when your substation level distribution grid is already, stretched. So if you increase your consumption, increase the load, then you just add to the problem. If you inject PV, you alleviate the problem. So scarcity, both at the network and the generation level, completely differently viewed from injection and from consumption point of view. And the second thing I want to talk about is visibility and controllability. So far, and not only in Southeast Europe, in Europe in general, in the UK as well, in the US as well, this is a big problem. All these distributed energy resources behind the meter, storage or PV or any kind of load shifting operations, they appear as a net load for the distribution system operator. I can tell you that in Hungary, distribution system operators, they are not very keen of having more and more PVs because it's a problem for them and they don't like the whole thing. And I think this is a big problem, a barrier for more PV, the DSOs. So what can you do with this problem? There are different steps or stages to solve this. I think the first stage is to have a PV register. You might think that this is a common sense, but in reality, it's not. In many, many countries, there is no register even of static data of PVs on the ground. In some countries, those are registered, which has been given some financial support, but the others, established purely on a business case, market-based, they are not registered. So I think the first step is to make sure that at least you have a static data in the country. So the capacity, the location, which voltage level is linked to the network, what's the vintage of the system. So, basic stuff. The second step would be to have operational data of how these PV actually operate during the day, how much they produce, how much is consumed on spot. So these kind of issues are essential for operating the grid in an efficient manner, especially considering the fact that what we can expect in the future is that we will have lots of new load. So there will be a bigger, distribution network will have a much higher challenge in the future than today due to the electrification of heat and transport. So these are key elements in the network, the distribution level. And the third one would be to have connections of these PVs in a way that alleviates some of the problems, which are not a big problem now in countries where there are only a few PVs, but it's already a huge problem in those countries with a large penetration. So issues like tripping, so dump inverters mostly deployed in many countries. Once there is a little fluctuation in the frequency, they trip, so they make the problem even worse. This is what happened in the UK, for example, in 2019, in August. So the whole blackout was not due to renewables, but renewables are always the one to blame. But in fact, when the problem started due to other reasons, because of these PVs, they had dump inverters, they in fact aggravated the problem. They made it much worse. But there is technical solution for that, so we don't have to invent new things, it's already there, but we have to make sure through regulation that new PVs, they already have smart inverters that will not allow for this minor frequency deviation to trip the PVs, and also they can provide grid supporting things like voltage support. So this is very important. Conclusions. The conclusions are that there are many benefits for PV, and this is a graph listing all the potential benefits. So whenever we think about PV deployment, we have to be aware of all these benefits, and we have to make sure that we try to harness as much as possible from these benefits. Usually there is a quarrel between utility and rooftop scale PV. And I don't think that needs to be exclusive, mutually exclusive. I think there is room for both. Of course, utility-based will always be more cheap due to economy scale, but there is an important role for small rooftop scale PVs as well. And I would like to highlight one issue which might not be so obvious from a European perspective, but it's getting more and more obvious in some countries of the world that resilience has an increasing value for the consumers. So whenever there is a problem with the network, with the PV and with the storage, they can manage through and they can avoid lots of loss due to loss of service. So my last comment would be my first comment is it's not just that we want fast deployment, but we want beneficial deployment. And we have to have our eyes on the long term when we devise regulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susanna, for the commentary. I also, I'm on the line with you that the more the merrier sounds really good, but we should be really careful on what is possible and how do we can actually integrate everybody which wants to be part of it. We're still waiting for the questions from the participants. And in the meantime, maybe we can discuss some points that I personally find interesting. This may be a question first for Toby. So you said that you already carried out some rounds of interviews in the region. I would like to know a bit more which type of the commercial prosumers are the most often. I believe that those are the ones with the biggest roof area. What is your conclusion for the region? Are those supermarkets, outdoor public offices? Who are the actual prosumers?
Yeah, well, it's important to keep in mind there aren't huge, in contrast to many other markets around the world. The market is still relatively at its early stages. So Greece has around 50 megawatts. Bulgaria and Croatia, are somewhere sub 20 megawatts. So we don't have a huge number of projects to be able to draw, robust conclusions about which actor types. But there are a few things that I would say. In Bulgaria, we're definitely seeing The ones that are doing it tend to be larger industries that have quite a large load and are using it for pure self-consumption. So no grid interconnection or no grid exports. In Greece, there's airports, public buildings are starting to play a bigger role. Public actors, I think, are waking up to the economic opportunity of low-cost solar and can actually save money in the process. In some cases, quite significant amounts of money by investing on public buildings. So I watched this space. I think public municipalities and public operators are going to be a major driver of the market, at least in the coming years. And in terms of maybe I'll stop there. I mean, I think there are, in terms of SMEs, depending on the market, there are some that have some categories that pay slightly higher retail prices than others, or some that have already moved to market-based pricing and rather than the traditional regulated tariffs. Those tend to be the ones that are more moving and investing because prices are a bit higher, or at least have been under the open market, so quote unquote unregulated commercial tariffs. So that plays a role. But again, I think it's a bit too early to make sort of sweeping generalizations about which actor types.
So market is still too small to make such conclusions. I personally believe that the best possible price for the producer, that is prosumer, is actually the saving of the fuel, in this case, electricity import, because this time you also save electrical energy, but also and the network and distribution prices. Regarding the other pricing mechanisms, according to you, what is your opinion? Which price is the most fair for the prosumer? You mentioned listed some types, but according to you, which could be the most fair? Maybe Susanna can also discuss this after you.
Great question. So I'd like to split that into two parts. One, I wanted to come back in the spirit of open debate and dialogue with Susanna to her suggestion of moving to more buy-all, sell-all arrangements. And we certainly see some signs of that. But it's important to keep in mind that buy-all, sell-all is just another word for a feed-in tariff. So buy-all, sell-all means you buy all of your electricity from your DSO or your utility, and you sell 100% of your gross output to the grid. So essentially, it's back to the future. We're going back to the past in a way, if we move in a buy-all, sell-all direction. So that's one important point that I would make, and maybe a question to Susanna. A further point that I would make about the buy-all, sell-all is I think there's a tension in your presentation, Susanna, that I'd be interested to hear you reflect on, which is that if we move to a buy-all, sell-all arrangement, we undermine the incentives to be more interactive with the grid. For example, you mentioned the Hawaii case. What you want is producers to supply their surplus less during the daytime hours when there's an abundance and more during the evening hours. But how do you get that behavior in place under a buy-all, sell-all arrangement? Under a buy-all, sell-all, the PV system will try to optimize its production, just like a feed-in will try to just maximize its output, and not take into account demand response. Whereas under a more hybrid arrangement, like a net fit or a net billing, there is an incentive to optimize your own consumption and production so that you can interact with the grid in a smarter way and provide electricity when the grid needs it, and maybe self-consume more when the grid doesn't. And if you separate that with a buy-all, sell-all, don't we risk undermining the very incentives we want?
Maybe comment from Susanna.
Well, basically what I wanted to emphasize is to move away from net metering. And I was thinking about putting down all three graphs with the net metering and net billing and buy-all, sell-all. And I decided I will go to the other extreme, just simply emphasizing delinking of consumption and production, and to move away from net metering. So in fact, I would like to step back based on your comments, and probably it would have been more beneficial to put the net billing graph there. But I just wanted to emphasize this delinking. And just another comment on how to think about PV. I think it would be probably more beneficial to think about distributed energy resources in general and how to optimize that within the households or within the premises of the building. And we should link here, of course, all the demand response options within the building, and to have a kind of optimization at the building or the premise level, and also co-optimization with the grid. There is a long discussion, at least I've been a member of some of the discussion, whether that we need a co-optimization or we only need an optimization at the grid level, and make sure that however you contribute, it should be from the grid level optimization. But to be honest, I cannot solve that problem. It's still under discussion. But it's very important that we don't see PV as independent from all the other distributed resources, for example, storage, because even at the incentive level, I mean, you can have incentives not paying for, people buying storage or, installing storage in their home, but simply through, let's say, the Hawaii structure. These, and also in California, they actually buy from their own money the storage just to be able to hedge on the price difference. Of course, it's difficult to talk about US examples because of the different structure there with the utilities. And sometimes it doesn't sell well in Europe, but there are some things you can learn from there.
Yeah. Thank you for a question and for answering. Yes, I also agree that this locally available demand response on the district or building level is a really interesting topic, maybe not part of the discussion. So I will move this to a question and answer. So we have received question from Elena. The question is, could energy communities contribute to the expansion of prosumers? And if so, under which potential regulations and provisions? Not sure for whom is meant, but I believe maybe that once again, Toby can start and maybe Susanna can comment.
Sure. So I think energy communities, short of creating special regulations for energy communities, which, as we've seen with the auction regulations, generates a host of gaming problems that are very difficult to govern. I think what makes a distributed solar project, be it 200 kilowatts or 2 megawatts or 20, bankable, is similar whether you're a municipality, an energy community, or a private SME. So we should aim for more harmonized regulations, harmonized pricing regimes, irrespective of form, of the form of the organization. Because I think the gaming problems, as much as, I'm part of an energy community here in Germany, and I'm an active supporter of energy communities, and we're writing reports on energy communities. But the gaming problems in terms of creating special categories and special provisions, it's very difficult to overcome and clearly define what is an energy community and what is not. So my sense, without getting into all the details, is in the medium term, we're more likely to evolve towards more unified policy frameworks that should be bankable for all project sizes and for all actor types, be they public, private, or hybrid. And I think there the question becomes, what if they receive public funding? So in the case of Greece, for example, there's already a mechanism built in place, I suspect, in other jurisdictions across Europe, where if you receive public funding, there's an adjustment that takes place. So that's kind of a separate set of issues, but I like the idea of broad, inclusive, bankable regulatory frameworks for all actor types, so that everybody, whether it's a small household or medium-sized business, all the way up to a municipality, level can all participate and achieve fair, non-discriminatory access to the grid and a fair price. I think that's really the goal.
In Croatia, we already had example of crowdfunding for a solar PV plant. This maybe also could be a part of this. Have you noticed similar examples in the region, or is the Croatia this time the first?
I'm familiar with the crowdfunding example. We actually just wrote a short case study on it, and yeah, I think people need inspiring examples of what is possible, and I think this shows an innovative way to mobilize small amounts of funding from many different people. And I think for countries like Bulgaria, Romania, with relatively low disposable income, we need to keep that in mind when we talk about this. Finding ways where small contributions can be pooled together efficiently is really important. That should enable 50 euro or 100 euro contributions to also be leveraged and part of the solution. And I think actually that's one area in terms of where the Croatia example, I think, can provide a good inspiration to many.
We're almost at the end of the Q&A, and maybe I can give you the last question, which is probably the challenge which was also mentioned by Susanna. The thing is also in Croatia, power distribution companies are not keen of prosumers. Now the question of who should take care of the increased distribution costs, because you have to do a local balancing on the neighborhood level probably. Is that costs already somehow contributed to the prosumers, or is the network costs always on the company dealing with distribution? What do you think, and how will that be in the future?
Susanna, do you want to take a shot first?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I mean, how much extra cost prosumers will cause, it also depends lots on the penetration level, lots on how congested or how concentrated PV is, how PVs are linked in terms of incentives. So, all the things we discussed before, when they will consume and when they will inject. I would rather suggest something which is very important to how to bring the DSOs on board, because it's not good if they must be forced to do things. I think they are companies, often private companies. So if you give them the right incentives to do things which the society wants, for example, to have lots of PVs on the grid, then you have to provide these incentives to these companies. And this is a task of the national regulator. So there are two ways or two steps to do it. One is to make sure that their revenue is not linked to the kilowatt hours they distribute. That's one thing. But, in this revenue cap regulation in most of the countries, this is mostly done. But there are more things you can do, and there are lots of regulatory pilots and already non-pilots in various countries to make sure that if you have a policy goal, let's say to have XY amount of smart meters or to have XY amount of PV connected as quickly as XY, then you can have these metrics and you can have give extra revenue for these DSOs if they comply. If they don't, you can give them a penalty. So in fact, you can link these goals to the money flow of these DSOs and make sure that they are motivated to do things, because they has the most information to make sure how these PVs can be connected in the most cost-efficient way. So I think this is an issue everyone talks about, and I have the feeling that nothing happens in Europe in general.
Maybe the challenge is not so big currently, so maybe they will take care of it when we increase the share. We'll see. It's 1:05. Thank you, Toby. Thank you, Susanna, for your presentations. And I'm giving microphone back to Nicola. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jose.
Yes, thank you. And thank you everyone on the podium and also for the audience for attending the event. We have another 10 minutes for a wrap up by Sonia Risteska, who is starting her camera now. And so
thank
I hand
you,
over
Nicola.
the microphone to you.
Thank you. I will not hold all of you for 10 minutes. I will just be a few minutes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the panelists, to the comments, to the commentators for being here today with us. We heard great presentations. The conclusion would be that there is still a long way to go for the region of Southeast Europe to achieve decarbonization. We are on the right track, but of course there are many challenges ahead of us. I can safely say that the future is solar everywhere, especially in a region which has amazing potential when it comes to the solar energy. Just to repeat what I think it was in Martin's presentation is that we really need more innovative and ambitious political elites when it comes to making decisions of how to reach decarbonization, because the path will be challenging. But we have all the tools, we have all the instruments, we have the funds, of course, most important. And we just need to decide that we want to get there by 2050, the latest, not the earliest. With this, I would like to wrap up actually the work in this project that we've been doing since 2018. When we started doing it, there was absolutely no discussion of coal phase out in the region of Southeast Europe. And now we have one country which will do it even earlier than 2030, Greece. The other countries are still deciding. And we as stakeholders in the energy sector, of course, are here to provide inputs and possible pathways which can ease the way towards getting rid of this fossil fuel. Of course, this is not the end of our work in Southeast Europe. We are wrapping up quite good. I would say there have been many activities, studies. The latest study that Toby presented will be published hopefully September, the latest. We will have, of course, now we are discussing to have to decide on what we are going to focus in the future. But the obvious answer is, of course, decarbonization of Southeast Europe as soon as possible, and of course, decarbonization of the entire continent, so we can keep the temperature from rising. And yes, with this, I would like to again thank you all for joining us today. And yeah, we will see each other soon on some other events. So, Nicola, back to you.
Yes. Thank you, Sonia, for wrapping this up for everyone. Thank you, everyone on the podium, for joining. And I would just like to give or to repeat once more that you can find all the presentations shown during the event on our website. And the recording of the event will be online at some stage over the weekend. So Monday, the latest, you should be able to review it or to forward it to someone you think may be interested. And in case you would like to be updated on the work, and also if you would like to be informed about the study when it's out, I recommend to register for our newsletter, because we communicate all the latest studies there and also upcoming events. And in order to make everyone able to wave goodbye, please everyone turn on the camera, also the ones who were acting behind the curtains, so that we have the full Monty on the screen. And yes, enjoy the rest of the day, and we hope to see you soon at another event. The panel will remain on the podium for another 10 to 15 seconds in order to make the cut not too hard, because being thrown out of a Zoom webinar always makes me feel a bit like, oh my God, the Zoom finished it for everyone. So we will stay here for another 10 to 15 seconds, and bye.